There'll be lots of opportunity to ask questions to our expert speakers. So I want to come on to some housekeeping slides to tell you more. So first of all, we have got, as Neil said, Q&A. We want you to use that Q&A section, not the chat function. And if you think that there's a question that's been put down that you think is really, really vital, rather than just repeating the question, if you can actually hit the thumbs up key, that would be great. And then we can bump it up the list of questions. Also, you'll see that there is the hashtag just one thing on the Unite platform. This is marked on the left-hand side. If you hit that, then you can actually type in your impressions of what you've learned from a session, what you will do, what you will take away and change in your practice going forward, how you'll do things differently in the future. So please do share using that hashtag just one thing, and also share generally more on social media using the hashtag GHHUnite. We really want to get the message across the importance of patient groups in cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular health, and you can get the message across very strongly in that way. So lots to talk about, lots of excellent speakers, and please do get involved in the ways that I've discussed. So I want to come on to our first session of the day. This is about how can cardiovascular patient organisations fundraise sustainably. This is a really, really important topic, of course, and last year the audience said they wanted to hear more on this, and we have responded, and we've got an excellent speaker and then panellists who are going to be answering your questions. It's vital, obviously, for organisations who are here to be assured of income year on year. And we have a world-leading expert on this topic, Clinton Conway. Christopher is president of Global International, and he'll be discussing the very first principles of fundraising. Global International is the world's largest healthcare philanthropy organisation, and we think that this is relevant to everyone, volunteer groups just starting off, or well-established organisations who are looking for new avenues and who want a reminder of the fundamentals of fundraising. Following that, we're going to have a panel of 3 different speakers with a range of different backgrounds to share experience and to answer questions. So, Christopher, thank you very much indeed for being here. You now have the floor for 20 minutes for your presentation introduction to fundraising. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. I am, as Jackie said, I am the president of Global International, which probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of folks because Global is the largest healthcare philanthropy firm in the world, but only recently expanded internationally. So from our US headquarters, I spend most of my time in Ireland. I happen to be in Los Angeles right now. But Global is working in 7 different countries in the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. And we are looking to expand even more. And we work with patients, clinicians, and leadership at research institutions, hospitals, to raise money for important programs like you all are doing in the cardiovascular space. So I'm just going to go through a presentation. It'll be a good warm up for the panel. And of course, folks can ask questions at that time. But what I'm really looking to do, and this will be available to share later, is to demystify this whole thing, because I know public speaking and raising or asking for money are the 2 most feared things. And public speaking, I get, because you can see I'm sweating a little bit this morning, but the asking for money, that shouldn't be something you worry about, because what we're going to do today is we're going to prep you for doing the ask and making the ask, and it's going to make you much more confident in doing that and thereby more successful. So here's what we'll go through, and I'll try to do it quickly. I have 28 slides, gulp, which is a lot. But again, you'll be able to reference this later, and I'll try to add some examples of work that I have done with Global and as an in-house fundraiser earlier in my career. So we'll talk about the fundraising cycle, developing and identifying a project that you want to raise money for, the actual physical creation of the proposal, prospect research, what does that mean to you? How can you do it? And then matching those prospects to the project. And then the process of engaging the donor, which is through cultivation and solicitation and eventually stewardship. And I'll also hit on some common mistakes so you don't avoid them, because I probably made all of them. And then we'll wrap up. So fundraising is about relationships, and that is a very simple statement, but I couldn't emphasize it enough. And if it's the only thing you take away from this, that's okay. Because fundraising, we have a lot of science, but there's also a lot of art to it. And so really being authentic and present and working with people who are grateful for what you're doing is key. So here's the fundraising cycle I just mentioned. It gives you an idea of the linearness of raising money, that it's not scattershot, it's not entering at any one of these points, but actually moving all the way through. So there could be no management of fundraising without planning, and that is the truth. So you'll need to sit down and really work with your leadership, whether that's other volunteers, or even if your organization is so small it's just a spouse or a friend, that's okay. You all want to be on the same page and have an elevator speech so that when someone asks, oh, what are you doing? You can quickly repeat it back to them. And there's consistency with all the external stakeholders. So proposal development, this I do a lot of because we work with a lot of research institutions. And so in research, it's really quite obvious and a good example. So for example, the Dr. Susan Love Foundation is a charitable organization in the US that I work with, and they fund research across a number of areas, including breast cancer, but women's health generally. And so what we did recently for them was we developed a proposal for their portable ultrasound, which is being deployed across sub-Saharan Africa. And so we then, as you can see, we then moved into prospect research, identifying who would want to fund a portable ultrasound project in that part of the world. And it made sense first to look at who is actually developing those ultrasound machines. And in this case, that is the GE Corporation. And so they were brought on as a partner to underwrite all of the costs. So prospect research, I put some resources here, and I know that a lot of times prospect research is expected to be a very formal, a very highly technical process. And in large institutions, it absolutely is, universities, major medical centers. But for patient organizations of all sizes, a lot can be done online. When I started in fundraising 30 years ago, it was all in books, right? And now here are 4 examples. And while these are US-based examples, they represent philanthropies that are giving money all over the world, because it's important to know that the US is the largest philanthropic market by far. And so Americans give to organizations in the US last year about 500 billion US dollars. But what a lot of people don't know is that those same Americans also give $200 billion to organizations around the world. And that's not government, that is purely private money from foundations, individuals, and corporations. And that's a significant amount of money. When you think in the UK philanthropy market is $10 billion, so just in scale. So prospect data, and a prospect, if you don't know, is a potential funder. At any level. And so what we like to say at Global is it's about someone's gratitude or connection to the organization. It's not just about capacity. Because I used to do a presentation for folks, I'm originally from Chicago, and the presentation was called Ask Oprah. Because people would always come to me and say, Christopher, you must know Oprah Winfrey, and she has a lot of money. Can't you ask her to give us a gift? And I would say, well, what's Oprah's connection to your organization? I mean, if she is already a donor or maybe has an interest, then we could absolutely figure out how to have a conversation. But just because someone is wealthy does not mean they'll give. But the idea that someone is connected to your organization or thankful for the work you're doing, that is a huge indicator of the potential to give. So matching prospects. So here's an example from the Dr. Susan Love Foundation. So in their breast cancer programs, they were really in need of unrestricted funding. And I'm sure all of you know the difference, or maybe you don't, between unrestricted and restricted funding. So when I mentioned their program in Africa, that was very much restricted funding. GE was giving money for that program, and that's wonderful. But so many organizations need unrestricted funding, which is money that allows you to prioritize and allocate based on what you believe is the most important thing. And that may be a staff salary, that may be a website, that may be a printed brochure, an event, what have you. And so what we did for the foundation in Los Angeles is we looked at prospects in the community that had large capacity, but that had, again, that gratitude that linked to their mission. And the Walt Disney Corporation, the largest entertainment conglomerate in the world, the founder, Walt Disney, had two daughters, Sharon and Diane. And both Sharon and Diane sadly passed away from breast cancer. So what we did was we made approaches to both of the foundations in the names of those individuals. And the Sharon Lund Foundation came on as a donor. And that's now we're in the 6th year of working with the Lund Foundation, and it's been fantastic because they had never before been approached by a breast cancer organization. And the daughter, Michelle Lund of Sharon, is actively engaged with the foundation, loves the work they're doing in the name of her mother. So cultivation, how did we engage Michelle and the foundation staff? So we certainly started with the obvious of inviting them to an event. That didn't work with them. They weren't interested. They're professional givers. They're very careful about how they use their time and what organizations they work with. And so we actually had them come in for a specific briefing. We felt like they had the potential to give at a significant level. So it made sense to have them come in and meet with Susan Love, who is a breast cancer surgeon and researcher. And so that was, really, Dr. Love has, very limited time. And so we felt it was worth it for someone at this level with this interest in the organization, and it certainly worked out that way. And then since then, these 6 years, they participated in walks, in dinners, in gala parties. And so it's become a multi-tiered relationship. And their connection to the organization is not just with Dr. Love. It's with a variety of staff, including consultants like myself, which is wonderful. So cultivation, why? I implied by saying, having the connection to a variety of people is important because so often relationships will lie with one key internal staff member or volunteer. And that can be dangerous because if that person, for whatever reason, no longer becomes involved, takes another job, it can be difficult to transition the relationship. And you really want the person to be connected to your organization or institution's mission, not just a relationship with a particular person. So, sorry. I meant to write process. I'm sorry about the V. Awareness, interest, trust, and commitment. So making them aware of what you're doing and who you are and how you're doing it, evaluating the interest of that person in what your mission is, and then establishing trust because it's so important. Someone is sharing their resources with you, whether it's time or money, and you want to be able to solidify that commitment. And you'll never get that commitment unless they really feel like they have that trust. So here's some examples of activities. It's totally up to you, right? You know your community of folks. What's best for them? I recently, at the Royal Victoria Eye and Ear Hospital in Dublin that we work with, we had a picnic because that's what staff wanted. And so we did that. It was outdoors. It was casual. We had staff, we had donors, we had board members, and it was fantastic. And it was very inexpensive. And that's what they needed at the Susan Love Foundation. Their culture of donors in Los Angeles is a bit more formal. And so they do quite a number of, I would say, higher end, more expensive, exclusive events, because that's what their donors are looking for. And so in 2 weeks, I'll be attending an event that they're holding in the Pacific Palisades, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and that's sort of their sweet spot. So they ask, once you get to it, right? They people, including Agnes Gund, who's a very famous arts philanthropist, she says that when you want money, ask for advice, and when you want for advice, ask for money. And I really believe that, actually. So, you don't want to come in guns blazing. It's very easy, and presumably you're extremely passionate about your mission, but don't let that overcome your careful relationship building. My first job in fundraising out of law school was with President and Mrs. Carter, post White House. And I had worked with President Carter on an ask for a particular individual donor. And when we got to the meeting with this person, the conversation happened, and President Carter, mid-conversation, decided that the ask we had developed was not right. So he said he needed to use the restroom. He went into the restroom with the presentation I had prepared, and he came out of the restroom without the presentation because he had torn it up and put it in his briefcase. So you never know. You want to make sure all parties are on board. In the end, I will say that person did fund the presentation, but it was my fault for not briefing President Carter more closely, so he fully understand the process by which we had identified this individual and really gotten to understand what they were looking to support. So stewardship is so often lost. Like the Susan Lund Foundation, they have been a giver for 6 years. So acquiring the donor is the most expensive in time, in funds, for example, if you're holding an event or what have you. And so keeping that person happy, engaged, is key, because you want to upgrade them to larger and larger gifts, and you want to keep them within the family with various ways, from the events to also various ways of giving, whether it's unrestricted, it's restricted. It may be in kind, like the GE Corporation, or a variety of other opportunities. So stewardship, and I don't mean to talk down to anyone, but this is real basic stuff that you have to remember. And I certainly have to remember myself, because sometimes you want to get in and out, you want to get the funds, you want to put them to good work, and that is admirable, but it's not the long-term strategy you want. And so the long-term strategy is to be careful, conscientious, and remember to thank people. My goodness, I go into organizations literally every day and hear from donors who say to me, well, I still give even though they don't thank me very well. And that's really such a missed opportunity, because being thankful it's just part of our job, right? Whether that's as a volunteer, a paid staff person, or a consultant. So making sure you have a process for thanking people, letters, emails, and certainly you want to be aware of requirements tax-wise in certain jurisdictions. Certainly in Ireland and the United States, you're required by law to acknowledge gifts at a certain level formally. So stewardship of the gift, financial reporting is key and is required in most jurisdictions. And that should not just be a very generic and numbers-oriented report. The numbers are important, but you also want to add visuals and testimonials and stories about how this gift has changed people's lives. That's key, because all the research that's done indicates that it is not, it's not just about the numbers. And actually people get lost and glazed over when they hear those numbers, especially when they're really large ones. We helped, 7,000 people. That doesn't mean a lot. But when you present an example of one of those people that was helped, that really gets people excited and want to give. So why report back? Well, at Global, we not only fundraise, we also work with people giving money away, and that's part of my job. And so if we don't get an appropriate report back, as to how the money was spent, that organization then is disqualified from being funded in the future. So just make sure you have a form report that you can add all of what is required by that particular funder. And what the donors want to know. Be transparent. I mean, all people probably have a tendency to present things in a better light than maybe they are, and that's understandable. But you want to, with your largest funders especially, you want to be transparent, really let them know what's going on, including when a staff person leaves, or which is less than positive news, and then good news for things like awards and other funders that maybe that individual foundation or corporation would see as a peer. So recognition is important. People always say to me, "Oh, Christopher, you're an American. Americans just love to have their names on everything." It's not really true. Those people certainly exist, but a lot of times I have to convince people to allow us to put their name on it, because it 100% encourages others to give and makes them aware that giving isn't even a possibility. So whether that is something as simple as a rented office space, or something as grand as a whole medical center, you want to be able to encourage the conversation about giving and the difference someone can make. So common mistakes. You have to be realistic about your timeline. When I go in and help an organization, I always tell them, don't expect anything in the first 6 months. It usually is less than that, but I want them to have their expectations in check. And so, as I said, with the clear communication, everybody on board for the fundraising, how it's going to be done and what it's going to be done for, it's key. I have a client that I won't name in Ireland that they have not yet really settled on a priority. And they say, well, Christopher, why can't you go out and raise money for it? And I go back to them and say, I'm looking forward to that day that we can raise money for it. But until you've identified the project, it's just not a possibility. So the conclusion, and I know I have 2 minutes, which is perfect. So raising funds involves the following principles: relationship building, which we've talked extensively about, confidence in that vision that is shared, that's transparent, and has been discussed fully, and attracted to success. People say to me, including some people at the Global Heart Hub, will Americans give to Irish institutions now that Ireland is doing so well from a financial standpoint? And I say, yes, people give to success. And the largest fundraisers in the US are institutions like Harvard University and the Mayo Clinic. And that's because they're successful and they make a great case for supporting them for impact. And then good prospect research, the cultivation stewardship, and then having a database for communications and marketing. And I look forward to questions and chatting with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. That was a great presentation. Love all the names that you've worked with in the past. So fantastic. I've just got a couple of questions myself, but yes, please, to the people viewing, please do send in your questions for Christopher. This is a great opportunity to ask this leading expert your fundraising questions. A couple of questions that I have is that you started off, Christopher, by talking about gratitude and connection. Now, we know with heart disease that obviously heart disease is a huge global problem. Many people affected by it, but obviously there are rarer types of heart disease where it may be harder to have a connection because there are fewer people with that. I mean, I just wondered where you've got fewer people, but still a great need for money for our research funding or whatever, or support funding. How do you get that connection when there's fewer people who have the condition?
It's a great question. I have worked extensively in the rare disease space. There's an organization I work with that's called the Guthrie-Jackson Charitable Foundation, and they raise money for and fund research in neuromyelitis optica, which affects less than 500,000 people worldwide. And so it's a very rare disease, but the case we make is that disease, neuromyelitis optica, relates to a lot of other diseases. And so research in that space can help other disease spaces, right? And so multiple sclerosis, a variety of inflammatory diseases. It's just like the COVID vaccines that were developed. Those would have never been developed without research in HIV and AIDS. And so, making the case for a larger community is important. And the idea of a successful model, that's important too for funders, especially really sophisticated ones like foundations or corporations.
Okay, thanks for that, Christopher.
Sure.
And in terms, I mean, you mentioned breast cancer, you mentioned rare diseases. I mean, have you worked much in heart disease, or is this something, and if you haven't, why do you think there is that difference?
Yeah, I've worked in so many disease areas, but for some reason, not heart in particular, right? The Carter Center, we worked in a variety of global health initiatives, but they were all parasitic related. And so we worked a lot with pharmaceutical companies and a variety of medications, distributing those to folks. I'm not sure why the heart community has not reached out to me. I certainly left my email address. They can feel free to. And I'm always glad to give people free advice. I'm not looking to find paying clients. I really believe in philanthropy. I'm a bit of a philanthropic evangelist, and I want to spread that all over the world, and certainly helping grassroots communities. I've worked in mental health as well, and oftentimes mental health organizations are extremely grassroots. One or two volunteers running a chapter that's maybe working in manic depressive illnesses or depression, and so I'm thrilled to help folks.
We've got a question just come in from Stefan Bassant, and I think you can see him on the screen now. And I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Stefan. He asked, "Is it interesting for funders and the industry if cardiovascular patient organisations work together on fundraising?"
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Stefan's from the LNA Cardiac Foundation. So yes, what about working together? Does that help?
Yeah. It's a huge thing, right? And obviously, it just multiplies impact. And that's especially valuable for foundations or government support. So when philanthropic organizations or charitable organizations want to lobby for government funds in the US, the UK, Ireland, wherever they might be, certainly coming together. And they don't even have to be the same mission, right? You can have a research organization, a patient support group, an information library. I mean, but if they come together, they create a real holistic approach to a particular area. So 100%.
And just finally, before we move on to the panel, Christopher, I was really taken by your term professional givers and the fact that, in the Disney example, that what they found worked for them was meeting Dr. Love, meeting the clinician. Have you found that was a one-off, or is that a good way to introduce donors more widely? Because, of course, many of the patient organisations will have contacts with clinicians.
That's right. I in my volunteer time, I often work for fundraising in the arts, and I'm on the board of the National Ballet of Ireland. And people there want access to dancers and choreographers, but it's the same in the medical and healthcare space. And so having access to experts to ask questions, for us, it's maybe a given that we're able to connect with specialists. But for most people in the world, that's not an option, right? And it's so easy now because we can just create a forum like this that's virtual, bringing those experts from wherever they are in the world. And that's a very exciting thing.
Great. Oh, thanks very much indeed, Christopher. I'm going to move on now to our panel. I want to introduce our three panelists. First of all, we have Joel Rose, who is Chief Executive of Cardiomyopathy UK. And Joel has a couple of other hats. He also volunteers for UK mentoring organisations focusing on very small charities, often with no staff. And he's also doing a PhD into, well, I'll leave him to tell you about that later on. But thank you. Welcome, Joel, to our panel.
Thank you.
We also have Jodie Smith, who's Programme Director for the Mended Hearts organisation, which is the largest cardiovascular support organisation apparently in the world. So welcome to you, Jodie. And we have David Evangelista, who is President and Managing Director of the Special Olympics in Europe and Eurasia. Special Olympics supports 5 million athletes, I think 1 million coaches and volunteers. So welcome to you for the panel. Now, 3 very different organisations, and Christopher, please do come in as well later for the questions. But, let me come to Joel first of all. Some really good practical advice. And Cardiomyopathy UK has been going for a number of years now. What resonated with you from what Christopher said? What do you say? Yes, absolutely, that works. And if you didn't do it that way, we wouldn't be successful.
Well, I think from our point of view, relationships, like you said, Christopher, is absolutely at the heart of everything. The way that we work it, and we do have the luxury of being, having been around for quite a bit of time. The way that we work it is that, there's broadly sort of 4 basic streams of money. So, we have what we would call the community funding, and that's really everyone who has that connection to the charity. So either they have the condition or they know someone with the condition. And they're the people who are giving us regular donations or fundraising for us, running marathons, doing bake sales, leaving legacies, some of them small amounts regularly, some of them big, what we would call major donors. So that we call the sort of community. And for that, really, that relationship is absolutely key. We don't need to sort of explain to them the impact of cardiomyopathy so much because they kind of get it. They're in that family. But really what we need to do is explain what we're doing about it and the services that we provide. I think for me, the most interesting thing and the thing that we I think got right early on, and the charity always started off with that stream. That was the first stream of income that we had. It's great because it's unrestricted, and Christopher, you talked about unrestricted and restricted, that's unrestricted money. The thing that we did right, I think, is to understand that for us, fundraising is actually like a service. So lots of charities have, the services they provide, the good stuff they do for people, like the helplines and the like, and we obviously have that as well, but we kind of see fundraising as part of that because it's the way in which our community stops feeling like they're victims. It's the way they sort of get off the back foot, cricketing analogy, I don't know whether that translates, but they feel that they're fighting back. They feel that they're contributing, that they're not worthless anymore, that they're doing their part in society. And for our disease, that's absolutely vital. And therefore, that ask isn't quite so hard because, we're not asking them to give out of, it's not about that sort of altruism. It's not an awkward ask. It's understanding that if we get someone to sort of do their bake sale, it makes them feel better about their condition, which is kind of our job. So that was always been really important. The challenge is moving people who come to us first to use our services to be into that group who then go on and leave a donation or a legacy. And we have processes to do that. But that's kind of really good. The other forms of money, a bit similar to what you were saying, Christopher, about professional givers. So, but 60% of our money comes from that community. There's about sort of 20% that we would come from trusts and foundations. And they're what we call head funders, right? So they're thinking analytically. They want to know what good are we going to do for the amount of money that they're going to give us. They want to know the objectives of the charity, what the outcomes are, and how we're going to measure it and how we report on it. So and these people don't know anything about cardiomyopathy normally. They've got no connection, but they have an interest in a better society. So in the UK, we have people like the National Lottery, who are big funders. We will go to them. They pay for all of our peer support work because we're able to say these are people who, without our intervention, would spiral into isolation and depression. But when we help them, they feel better able to contribute. And we can demonstrate that. And here's all the evidence.
Thanks, Phil. Let me come on to one of the other panelists. But thank you very much indeed for those great comments. Jodie, you're over the pond. What resonated with you with what you've heard from Christopher, but also with what you've heard from Joel? I saw you shaking your nodding your head. Sorry, not shaking your head, nodding your head when Joel was talking.
Yes, the relationship piece is the key piece. It's the number one thing. And when we work with sponsors, we consider it a partnership. So we don't only think of what we can get, we think of what we can give. So what can we provide to them? How can we make this meaningful for them as well? And that's really essential. The other piece that really resonates with me is the planning piece of it. You need to get a plan together before you do anything else and get real clear on what you need and why. And when you have a good plan, then you can start researching prospects, and you can start researching the who you can go to and things like that. But you can't do that until you have a plan. And then you can decide also, is this a grant opportunity, or is this a fundraiser that we need to put on, or is there another way to bring in this funding? And I would say the third thing is make sure, like when you're writing a proposal, you understand the need and you research it. I go out and I do a lot of research on the statement of need. I feel like that's the most important thing of the proposal, because it shows why this is needed, where the gap is, what gap are we filling. And then the other thing, if we're going to have a fundraiser, we try to make it fun, and don't be afraid to try new things. We had a virtual charity race in 2015. This was long before anyone was doing anything like this, long before COVID. Now that you see them all over the place, they're a dime a dozen. But we tried it and made it fun, and that was a success for us at that time.
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. And also, you talked about those kind of smaller things, and then I also look at your website, and you've got, regular giving. And Christopher, of course, was talking about these big donors, and Joel mentioned these big donors. I mean, what's the kind of proportion? What should an organisation aim for in terms of the people doing things which make them feel good and also raising money, but then the big donors, the professional givers?
Well, there are many different stats on how much you should get from, if you get funding from industry versus foundations versus individuals. But the rule that I see most often is that about 70% of your funding should come from individuals, and that ranges from 50 to 70%. And Christopher probably knows a lot more than I do on that. We do not have that percentage, and sometimes that proves a little challenging for us, and especially during COVID, where it was so hard to do individual fundraising from individuals. That has really been something we need to build back up, and we're working on that for 2023.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll come back to that, because of course something like COVID hits and everything, your more funding model goes out the window, and then I think we'll come on to talk in a little bit about sustainable funding. But David, let me come to you, David Evangelista. What's your experience and the different type of organisation you represent?
Well, thank you very much. Special Olympics is quite a unique organization. We define ourselves as a movement that's dedicated to restoring the dignity of people with intellectual disabilities in their communities and empowering them to achieve their best. Our methodology is sport and inclusive development. But of course, a key part of sport is our global health platform, healthy athletes, healthy communities. So we do a lot of work with cardiologists, with the global health community in general, but namely, with a range of disciplinary doctors, including cardiologists. My approach to fundraising is so. First off, huge thanks to the Hub and to the Unite Summit for this generous invitation, and I couldn't agree more with a number of the key tenets that our colleague Christopher had started with, namely in the area of planning. And also creating a culture of being thankful and extending gratitude. If I had a dime for every time I said thank you on a daily basis, there would be no need for fundraising. I would just generate it simply through the fact that gratitude has to be a key component of this work. But I would challenge I would challenge all the groups listening to dare to reconsider that. Maybe what we're really after is not fundraising, but relationship raising. Christopher said at the beginning that it's all about relationships. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I really don't believe in fundraising, and the reason I don't is because Jackie and I trust my colleagues Joel and Christopher and Jody would likely agree. But if you develop a great relationship and you sustain that relationship with real content, real substance, real relevance, and you drive the alignment between your need and that relationship, money happens. It's not it's not something that needs to be overly forced. So I agree. If you need money, ask for advice. If you need advice, ask for money. If you need it, if money is what you're after, really what the foundation of that money is, you need to build trust, which is what goes to the core, Jackie, of what I define all of our development work on, which is connectivity. Can you create a lasting connection with, be it, as Jody said, a donor, an industry leader, a foundation, a government? And if you can, then that connectivity has an electrical current, and you can dial that up and dial it down because it's a living organism. And I really do believe in the power of connectivity.
Thanks for that, David. That's great. So let me just bring things back to maybe a smaller scale. So many of the organisations who will be listening will be smaller organisations, maybe even over, manned by volunteers, don't have the kind of capacity to bring in the kind of relationships that we're talking about necessarily. Joel, I know that you're, as I said, you're doing this work, this mentoring organisation about how small charities and volunteers can fundraise. I want to ask all three of you, how can small organisations make these first steps? How can you transition from being a volunteer organisation to a more professional model of fundraising? Joel, first of all.
Well, I think the first thing is understanding your community and your own strengths and what it is that you want to do. And like Jody said, what is the request? What is it that you're asking for, and what is the value of that? Generally, I would sit down with the charity and we sort of look at that, and we would talk particularly about some of the accepting that certain streams of money take certain amounts of time or investment, right? So, and that's what we would call the return on investment of different sources of money. And you can choose the one that's right for you. It's not a one size fits all. There's some charities I speak to who are just absolutely spot on for a £10,000, lottery grant, and it's about a day's work, and it's pretty straightforward. The point that I would always make, though, is that you want to quite quickly get to a point where you have diversified that income, right? So you've got to start somewhere. It might be industry funding, and it might be trust funding. So the sorts of money that you're not running around putting on a bake sale or running a big event. If you don't feel that you've got that major donor relationship up and running yet, or yet there isn't a legacy that's kind of fallen on your lap, start somewhere, but don't forget to also just carve out that little bit of time that you're going to need to develop all the other streams of fundraising as well, because that's what gives you the resilience when things like COVID happen.
Christopher, do you want to comment on this at all?
Yeah, there's sort of a basic exercise of circles of relationships. So ones that are closest to you and those that are further out. And when folks are wanting to raise money really early on, I think about everyone you are connected to, whether it's your dry cleaner or your rich uncle across the country, to further out folks, maybe alums that you shared in a school or another organization, letting all of them know what you're doing. And as David said, that often follows, money often follows those introductions and conversations.
Thanks, Christopher. Jody, did you want to add anything to that?
It's funny because I was going to say that about the importance of forming a community and creating awareness in the community. A lot of times when so one of our programs, Mended Little Hearts, is support, education, and advocacy for families with children born with severe heart conditions. In fact, my son was born with one, and that's how I got involved. And when you have a situation like that, you start by raising awareness of the condition in the community and build your community. It's amazing how many people you can go to. There's we have Best Buy here is a store that does sells technology, and we used to go just ask if we could speak to them. We'd go to the Rotary, which is here in the United States, that they give money, and ask, can we speak to you? And we'd go everywhere we could and say, hey, can we speak to you about what we do and who we are? And people did give us money. And we needed the money to be able to provide services to the local hospitals and so forth. So we built that community. I would say another really important thing is don't start too big. Don't plan a gala, your first time out the door. That is a mistake because they cost a lot of money. You have to spend a lot of money on some events to make the money. And so don't start too big. And if there's an organization like we partnered with another organization that did these superhero heart runs, and we were able to work, they already had the system down. So we were able to work with them. We got a percentage of the fundraising, and we didn't have to create it from scratch, but we were able to learn how to do it. So I would say, start building it small. Do things like a t-shirt fundraiser on Bonfire or another site where you can sell something and you get some money coming in the door, you start building awareness, and then get bigger.
Thanks, Jody. Good advice.
Jackie, I don't want to take away from David, but can I give an example that just occurred to me that's a recent one? And the reason it occurred to me was Jody mentioned Rotary, and certainly Rotary and Lions Club are extremely active all over the world. And this particular group, all volunteers doing health fairs throughout Africa, but primarily in Nigeria. And they wanted to start professionally fundraising, but didn't know how. So what we did was we created awareness through communication. And mostly that was social media because they were truly limited in what they could afford to do. And then also email updates. And that led, and I'm not making this up, that led to an unsolicited $3 million grant from the Gates Foundation. Wow. Because they had never heard of them and they loved what they read. And then, of course, they didn't just send a check for $3 million, but they contacted the lead volunteer and said, what are you doing? Tell us more about it. And within just a matter of weeks, they had that $3 million.
Well, that's a great success story. How wonderful. Thank you. David, I know that you've already, talked about this when you first came on, but anything to add from what you've heard in terms of how, volunteer manned organizations can get bigger through fundraising?
I think you have to, so there's no shortcuts. That's my best advice. Transitioning from a volunteer-driven organization to more of a professionalized outfit is not, that's not an overnight process. It's not a turnkey process. And there's no shortcuts. Professionals you hire and fire, but volunteers you can only tease and squeeze. And so you have to be very diligent how you pressure or not pressure volunteers, because at the end of the day, these people are doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Now, on the flip side, if you go on the adage of you get what you pay for, you have to have that very omnipresent in your thinking and in your planning. I work extensively with Lions Clubs International. In fact, I'm a Lion of 23 years, and they very much do the work that Christopher had mentioned and Jody on the Rotary side. These are people that give of themselves to make their communities a better place, and they do a lot of global initiatives that are implemented locally. The best way that I could say an organization can go from volunteer to professional is diligently. Set a timetable, set milestones. You will not make all of them. That's okay. But the difference between a volunteer organization and a professionalized outfit is very clear and quite linear. And at the end of the day, there's very few and far between $3 million gifts that will go to volunteer outfits. At somewhere there will need to be a component of hire and fire rather than tease and squeeze. Having said that, never underestimate the very compelling nature that volunteers have when engaging philanthropy, industry, government, and donor relations. The idea that somebody could do something out of the goodness of their heart because there's a passion behind the project, because there's a relevance, as Jody had mentioned, there's a relevance to their involvement, that has tremendous viability. In many cases, more viability than any professionalism. So I would say that as that migration takes place, I would encourage organizations to do it diligently, but to consider the value of both ends of that spectrum. And hybrid, to use the relevant term in these days of sustainability, hybrid models have shown to be the most effective, because in the world of relationship building, partnership development, there's no one size fits all. That's not, it's very much a personalized setting. So, and I can say that migration is also perhaps one of the more exciting parts of the work.
Yeah. And I think you've covered this question. We had a question from Helen and Robert who said, how would you suggest a brand new organisation focus their efforts to get launch funding? Well, I think many of the things you've just said would apply. Is there anything further that a brand new but professional organisation might want to do?
I'll start very quickly, Jackie, and just say that money is not a bad word. If you're really passionate about the work, you will not be afraid to ask for money.
Okay.
That's the relationship. And so the only way to get that fully professionalized outfit is you're going to need a foundational investment. And I think anyone who's got those resources at any one of those sectors will understand that by you asking for a large sum of financing to create a professionalized outfit, that will unto itself communicate a number of key values: grit, vision, and patience. And those are very good attributes to have when it comes to, direct investment, foreign investment, et cetera.
Let me come on to a slightly different topic. I mean, Jodie was mentioning earlier about sustainability, and we talked about, COVID changing things. How can organisations make sure that their funds are guaranteed month after month? What are the things they can do to be able to withstand those rocks and blows that come along with life? Joel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to what I said before about having a mixture of different sources of income. So COVID, we were actually fine over COVID. We're more worried about the next 2 years because I don't know about other countries, but we've probably got a tough time. And so that 60% we have of community income is going to be a bit challenged. But we know that we've been able to grow the trust income from industry, and this new area that we've developed, which is around unleashing our sort of intellectual capital, as it were, and our engagement in research and charging for patient insight into research. And that's interesting because that's something that I think a lot of the smaller, more rare disease charities can be engaged with. I think lots of Global Heart Hub members can be engaged with that sort of earned income. But I think we're just being really honest with our community, saying this is how COVID is impacting you as people with the condition, but also us as a charity, and this is where we are. And we've got calling in old favors, and because we've got those good relationships, people understand that you're going to have hard times.
Okay, Jodie, did you want to add about that about sustainability?
I think I agree with what Joel says, but I would also say too, I mean, there's no guarantee, but you can do the things you can do when you create programs. Create in them a way to expand. Don't create a one-year program, create a several-year program, and a way you can expand it, the way you can get into new communities, the way you can make it better and bigger, and including hybrid options and virtual options. You've got to be creative and do things differently, and that is the way you can also bring in more funding with something just brand new that no one has thought of before.
Okay. And I just got a question here, a different type of question. In terms of when you have got an established organisation, any hints on how to handle donors wanting to change the project scope or personnel? That's interesting. That's a question from Alison Fielding. Christopher was talking earlier about, it's difficult when people leave. What about if the donor doesn't like somebody who's who they're dealing with? What do you do then? That's a tricky one. Christopher, did you have any thoughts on that one?
You saw me take my mute button off. Yeah, don't do it. I mean, mission drift is one of the worst things you can possibly do. And, I always, pay it forward, which people used to say all the time. I'll refer folks to other organizations. I'll say, you know what, that's not what we do. It's not part of our mission. But here's 3 organizations that do it. And I'm glad to introduce you. And that usually comes back to you in a variety of different ways.
Okay, thank you. Jodie's nodding. What's your take on that? And Joel. Jodie first, then Joel.
No, I agree. You have to stay true to your mission. That's the most important thing. If you go outside of that mission, then it's just like selling yourself. You've got to be true to that. And even if people don't like it, and you can be kind and respectful about it, but you can say, this is where we are. It's a difficult situation with personnel issues, but if you had, depending on the personnel you have, you may be able to buffer that with some different personnel as well.
Okay, thank you.
Say quickly, Jackie, I have to agree with Jody. Not only is nothing guaranteed, but I actually don't believe in sustained fundraising. I think the best fundraisers I've ever met, the best partnership leaders I've ever met, are those that are very keen every day, every moment on new business development. The more new business you can create, the more sustained business you'll have. Because look at the global economy right now, inflation, commodities, energy. Anyone who had sustained revenue at the beginning of 2020 is looking at a drastically different economic landscape, and that's just 24 months. So that's number one. But I also believe that mission drift. I couldn't agree more with Chris. Christopher's right. You stay true to form. When it comes to donors providing direct feedback into personnel, into stewardship, my experience is that more often than not, I have been well served by listening. That's not to say that I agree, but it is to say that you can learn about what's happening in your organization. And also, by way of their feedback, you can also get a window into who they are also, which always helps your ability to develop more of a connection, more of a relationship, and potentially more of a transactional setting. So I always assume, I always go on the adage that that the person I'm speaking to knows something I don't. So I'm always keen to listen, but I never rely on the idea of sustained revenue, because all it takes is an earthquake, a war, a pandemic, and sustainability becomes something far more urgent.
Sure. We just got a couple of minutes left of the panel discussion. We heard the question earlier on from Stefan about is it interesting for funders and the industry if cardiovascular patient organisations work together on fundraising? There's the hint there of rivalry between organisations, and is it possible? And also the element with industry, working with industry. Joel, you're doing your PhD, I think, on this subject. It's early days, but what did you think about Stefan's question?
Well, I think the first part of the question about working together, I think it's absolutely right, and that certainly when it comes to the trust and foundation funders that we have, because what we're saying is, this is the problem, that our people or our community or our society faces, and the solution is going to come from putting a lot of heads together and working collaboratively. So our trust and foundation partners really want to see us that, have we worked with the NHS? Have we thought about this organisation? Have we got a partnership with that? So that's really important. I think when it comes to industry, for me, the main thing I would say is, first of all, don't frame those relationships as fundraising relationships only. I think it's always important for particularly the charities that engage with Global Heart Hub to have those relationships. A lot of the value isn't financial. It's about understanding the landscape, understanding the medicines, and being able to do the best job for your people. And I think when it does come to financial support, it is really just a question about thinking about what is the percentage of support that you're comfortable with as a total, and the impact that would have on whether your service users think that you're still honest and you're on their side, or whether the people you want to lobby, or whether it's to do with technology appraisals, still trust that you're speaking, from yourself, you're not under any influence, and that's a figure that everyone's going to have their own different number to. But it goes back to that first point. The more that you divest and the more that you have different sources of income, that the easier that is.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to come to a little bit of a wrap up. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure there's an awful lot more we could talk about. But I want each of our panelists and our speaker, Christopher, to think about what's the final piece of advice or the key takeaway you'd want cardiovascular patient organisations to think about as at the end of this session. I think we'll go first of all to we'll do David, and then Joel, Jody, and then Christopher. So, David, what would be your final piece of advice to the audience regarding fundraising?
Create connection. Create real connection. You have to build not just a relationship, but a connection. There needs to be something that drives you to want to speak with them and them wanting to speak with you. Where you have connection, you have everything. Where you don't have connection, everything is now a challenge and an uphill battle. So rather than focusing on money, focus on connection. And from there, the rest is an exciting professional journey.
Thank you, David. Joel, what about you?
Pretty similar, but I think, being really honest, always trying to do the right thing, always being thankful, those things, are greater than any well thought through strategy. Just being decent sometimes, and it always comes back.
Karma. Okay, thank you for that, Joel. Jodie, I'll come to you next.
I would say that understand that fundraising can feel very overwhelming. It's one of the biggest overwhelming issues for most charities, nonprofit organizations, and that's normal. But have confidence in what you are doing. Like, if you really believe in what you are asking funding for, then you will do okay. Trust in that, and don't be afraid to ask. The worst that can happen is someone says no, and that can be turned into a yes later, but don't be afraid of that ask. Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed, Jodie. Don't be afraid. Okay, let's move on to Christopher. Christopher, you've heard the panel discussion following your presentation. What's the pieces of advice you'd like to give to patient organizations in this space?
Well, mine is sort of life advice that can be applied to fundraising and well, and that is to be present and to breathe. I meditate every day, and I can't recommend it enough to people. And even 3 minutes a day is worth it, because you want people, as David said, to connect, to hear you, to give feedback, and you need to be present and authentic to really successfully do that.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for that. It's been a really fascinating discussion with lots of really important and practical pieces of advice that patient organisations can take forward. So yeah, if you want to see Christopher's presentation, the slides, they will be in the resources section. So make sure you can, download them there and, read them in your leisure. To get that advice. And also remember, please do use the hashtag #JustOneThing. If there's one thing that you've learned from this session, which you think, right, I'm going to do that, that's going to really, really help me going forward in my fundraising. So absolutely, please do that.